Zelda is a series that has been with me as far back as I can remember. Some of my best childhood memories are associated with this series. It's one of the only series that I've played every game in, and if you ask me what I think of any given game, I can provide a detailed account of every single one. Because I know this series essentially by heart. I know all 16 games inside and out, and that's why choosing which ones I like more than others is like trying to decide which of my 16 hypothetical children I love the most. But I'm going to do it anyways, because this is a fun list to make. Especially when you know every game so well, because there's no blur in the middle like most other people might have. Now what's great about this list is, it's different than yours. And that is the awesome thing about opinions, everyone has their own. If everyone's list was the same, then that'd be boring. So obviously the point I'm making here is, don't hate me because my list is wrong or stupid, because it's not. And neither is yours. So instead of saying a comment saying this game is too low, or how could you consider this game better than this one, leave a comment with your own list instead. I'm always interested, and I'm not just saying that. Anyways, this isn't a list that I just threw together real quick to make this video. I've thought about this forever. Like I said, since I know every game so well, at no point will I ever play through an old game and be like, oh yeah, I forgot how awesome this game is, I'm gonna rank it higher. This list is definitive for me, so if you're interested in my opinion, this isn't really a list to take with a grain of salt. But with all that in mind, let's get started. There is only one game in this entire series that I truly and honestly cannot stand. Whereas some might be better than others, or some might not be great by the series standards, there's one game that isn't even worthy of being judged by the series standards, because it's not just bad as a Zelda game, it's just bad as a game altogether. I am talking, of course, about the abysmal Legend of Zelda No, I'm just kidding, it's Phantom Hourglass. This game is crap. It took everything great about Wind Waker and tossed it over a fucking cliff. The sailing is awful. Instead of complete free-roaming wonderfulness like in Wind Waker, you just plot a course and watch the damn boat do all the sailing for you. You can't even turn. All you can do is tap the screen to bomb the enemies. And unlike in Wind Waker, these enemies will not go away until you kill them. And there's no exploration because the world is so small, and you can't even roam around looking for little things to find because you have to follow your plotted course. You can't even turn without replotting your course. So basically sailing in this game is just a semi-interactive loading screen as you wait for the next island. The story is crap, the dungeons are pathetic, and the music is an absolute abomination. Even people who like this game agree that the music sucks big time. The combat is a joke, and the puzzles might as well not even exist. None of them require more than approximately half of a brain cell to solve, but approximately 100% of the puzzles have a little sign right next to them explaining exactly how to solve it. Don't even get me started on the atrocious Temple of the Ocean King. By the 4th or 5th time back, I literally could not take it anymore. I threw the DS to my friend who could finish it for me. Who thought this would be a good idea? Did no one bring this up during meetings? Like, hey, this dungeon is tedious, repetitive, fucking boring, and all around just a piece of shit. Think we should, fix it? Phantom Hourglass has a few redeeming factors. The controls work good, lineback is awesome, and the humor is great sometimes. But these few things can't salvage this absolute joke of a video game. The Legend of Zelda 4 Swords worked at the simple level of mindless multiplayer fun. I kind of admire that game not even bothering trying to make a grand adventure fleshed out into a full game. But when Nintendo took the concept and did exactly that, the result is a game that is both underwhelming and exhausting. The Legend of Zelda 4 Swords Adventures for GameCube is one hell of an investment to get the full experience out of, and so I've only ever been able to play the single player option. But that's okay since it was touted and advertised as being able to play with one player. Plus, playing through 4 Swords on single player, you can just tell that the multiplayer will be fun, but with 4 Swords Adventures, I don't get that feeling at all. This game is plagued by numerous problems, the biggest being that in my opinion a fully fledged linear and level-based Zelda game just does not work. It loses one of the biggest appealing factors of the series, and so it must compensate via excellent level design. But it falls short in that aspect too. The puzzles are uninspired. Positioning 4 links on 4 switches gets old real fast, but it's used throughout the entirety of the game. Playing 4 links at once is exhilarating during combat, but cumbersome during everything else, which is the vast majority of the game. The item and heart system is annoying, so there's no sense of improvement by endgame, and thus underwhelming pacing that never provides a compelling reason to keep playing. Plus, having only one item at a time has other issues, like the items are horribly unbalanced in terms of fun factor. The game thrives when you have the bow and fire rod, but lulls with the hammer and bombs. Also, when the game gives you a choice of many items, you never know which one you're supposed to take. Way too often do I have to backtrack all the way to the little item congregation because I discovered that I needed bombs or something to progress. Plus some levels are just plain busy work, most notably Village of the Blue Maiden where you have to run all over the place doing stupid crap. The music sucks too. It's entirely composed of 6 or 7 tracks from A Link to the Past that repeat throughout the whole game with zero OST to speak for. I got stuck way too often in this game my first time playing, but it was never due to my own stupidity. It was just obscure and unintelligent design choices like chopping every single bush and pot on screen to discover a little hole. This is the part I was stuck for the longest on. I wandered about the graveyard for like an hour. How was I supposed to know that you do a down thrust next to the block to break the pot on the other side? You never have to do anything dumb and obscure like that in the Zelda games, and they have no place in this series. Overall, Four Swords Adventures is okay. It thrives on its action sequences, and the rest isn't that bad, but it does nothing new for the series, and is essentially just a combination of A Link to the Past and Four Swords, but in the end I would rather just be playing either of those games. With that being said, time to talk about the game's single biggest flaw. This fucker just ignores me. Get back here, you asshole, I'm talking to you. The very last Zelda game I played was The Legend of Zelda Four Swords, and my story is the same as everyone else's. I got the Link to the Past GBA release, but had no friends with the game or link cable, so I just stared at the title screen and watched the opening cutscene over and over. And then Nintendo finally announces a re-release for DSi with two extremely welcome features: free and wireless. So I finally got to play it, and it was pretty good. Now the Anniversary Edition of Four Swords also comes with a single player option. Please take my advice, don't even bother. Unlike Four Swords Adventures, this game was not designed with single player in mind, obviously, and as a result you're in for a very boring 45-minute game. You win every time, and the level design is not good enough to justify playing alone. The story, level design, bosses, and music in Four Swords are all absolute garbage, but it's made up for with just simple mindless multiplayer fun. I was really excited to see the magnetic gloves make a comeback. They're easily the best item in Oracle of Seasons, and I had absolutely no idea they were even in this game, but they weren't really used that great. I know the levels are randomized, but I've yet to get a good use out of the magnetic gloves beyond pulling off Helmasaur masks or pulling the other Link across a pit. But granted, I've yet to play with more than one other person, so maybe the 4-player levels are better. It's weird, but playing Four Swords for the first time sort of both strengthens and weakens my opinion of Minish Cap at the same time. Minish Cap is a rock-solid game, and I knew it borrowed all the graphics from Four Swords, but I had no idea it was working off such a cheat sheet. Everything I had once thought Minish Cap came up with, like remote bombs, chargeable arrows, even Minish Cap's central aspect of a cap that allows you to shrink, are pulled straight from this game. Now Minish Cap isn't exactly known for its innovations to the series, so this kind of dampened my perspective of that game. But on the other hand, the entire time I'm playing Four Swords, all I can think about is how much I'd rather be playing Minish Cap. And so I go back to that game and I'm like, yeah, this is what Zelda's supposed to be. The Wind Waker was revealed to terrible, terrible outcries, so afterward Nintendo issued a formal apology for Wind Waker in the form of The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. But apologizing for Wind Waker resulted in a game that didn't feel like it came from the heart. It didn't feel like a game Nintendo even wanted to make. It felt like a compilation of everything the fans were begging for, more or less just a grander retelling of Ocarina of Time. And that is precisely what makes Twilight Princess fall short in my opinion. It's got other problems too, of course. The story was a mess, the difficulty was insulting, and the items became useless souvenirs immediately following their respective dungeons. But the dungeon design was out of this world, and Link controlled better than he ever had in previous games. The world was gigantic, and there were a lot of really great moments in Twilight Princess. I feel like its utter lack of innovation could maybe have been justified as being more of a perfection of the formula, but the plethora of other flaws in Twilight Princess makes it fall short of this theory. But overall, Twilight Princess is a fun, solid Zelda game that's more than worthy of your time. How do you follow up such a monumental achievement in gaming like The Legend of Zelda? Well, one way to do it is to not even bother trying and go in a completely different direction that barely even resembles the first game. Everyone knows Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, is the black sheep of the series, but have you ever really sat down and played this game? Because if you don't mind a challenge, this game is fun as shit. The combat and leveling system is so satisfying, and the dungeon design is confusing but excellent. It does kinda get repetitive after a while, but it's still fun leveling all the stats up and learning new spells. There is one fundamental flaw in The Adventure of Link though. You know what it is too. Every time you die, you go all the way back to the North Palace. This just gets so incredibly annoying by the end of the game, but thankfully you're given a single save state in the whole game, and it's at the beginning of the Great Palace. Not like it really matters, cause this dungeon will kick your ass. The game that started it all just barely doesn't crack the top 10, but who cares, because to this day, The Legend of Zelda on NES is a blast to play. It's so open, and you can do everything in whatever order you choose. You can get the level 2 sword, the power bracelet, the blue ring, and a wealth of other stuff before even entering one dungeon. I'm even one of those people that played through the whole game without a sword. Now that is what I call freedom. This game's pretty damn hard too, and there's so many secrets. I can never get tired of this game because I can never remember which bushes lead to rupees and which lead to people that make you pay for the door repair. And there's even a second quest that is just absolutely merciless. How is anyone supposed to figure out you're supposed to walk through the wall in the second dungeon? This game is just so great. You've already heard me talk about this game, but The Legend of Zelda the Minish Cap is what I consider to be the quintessential Zelda game. It does nothing really wrong, but it does nothing really right either, apart from just being classic Zelda greatness. Which is not inherently a bad thing, because unlike Twilight Princess, Minish Cap has a sort of charm and identity all to its own. Really the only flaw in Minish Cap besides its lack of innovation is it's kind of linear, but even that's not terrible, and it's not as bad as it was in Twilight Princess or Skyward Sword. But apart from that, Minish Cap is just a joy to play. The dungeon design is fantastic, especially the Palace of Winds. The music is incredible. The side quests are great, there's a balls ton of heart pieces, and Ezlo is awesome. There's a couple instances of stupid filler, like returning library books or getting a mushroom to wake the guy up, but that's not even close to being a big deal. Also, the bosses kind of suck. Overall though, just a purely great Zelda game and definitely deserving the top 10. I'll admit, when Spirit Tracks was first revealed, I legitimately thought it was a joke. I thought someone was like parodying just how low the series could sink. But when I found out this was actually a real game being made by Nintendo, I was pissed. Spirit Tracks was also the game, however, that finally taught me not to judge a game before playing it. Because when I actually got around to playing Spirit Tracks, it was actually pretty damn good. My biggest problem with Spirit Tracks are all the little flaws that it couldn't release from its predecessor. Like no possible way of exploring the overworld except on the train, lazy heart containers instead of heart pieces, an underwhelming quantity of items and no bottles, etc. But all of the major flaws from Phantom Hourglass were fixed, which is why it pisses me off when people call this game the recycled Phantom Hourglass. The Temple of the Ocean King has been replaced with the best part of the game, the spectacular pseudo-co-op Tower of Spirits, which has some seriously devious and fresh puzzles. The enemies are bigger and better, the puzzles are far more challenging, you can steer the train manually without having to plot a course and watch the train do all the work for you. The story was excellent and didn't feel like a lazy excuse just to play the game, and best of all, the music is absolutely amazing. I could say a ton about Spirit Tracks, and I have, but the main point with this game is that what it does well exponentially surpasses what it does wrong. Nintendo latest and hugest Zelda game is, for me at least, the same case as Spirit Tracks in that I could fill books with the amount of flaws in The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, but what it does good, it just does so good. Flying sucked, the motion controls were annoying, it's linear as all hell, and it's padded to hell and back with crap tons of unwelcome busywork. But the story and cinematics are the best in the series, Girahim is fabulous, the dungeon and field designs are masterful, bosses are awesome, and there's even multiple ways to defeat a majority of them, the enemies don't deal a quarter of heart damage finally, and Skyward Sword has some of the greatest moments in the series. Its flaws are still there and they're glaring at you the whole game, and unlike some other games I could come up with simple and easy ways to fix almost all of them, which means none of them are really a fundamental part of the game. They do somewhat derail the experience, but something will always immediately come along to put it right back on track. It's almost impossible to put my feelings for Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening into words. It's such a magical and whimsical game that's so easy to get captivated by. It's such a big and ambitious Zelda game, especially for being the first handheld title, and God I have such nostalgia for this game. Looking back, I think I may have played Link's Awakening the second most of all the Zelda games. Now I did play it a lot and beat it several times, but then I discovered screen warping. And it was almost like having a whole new game to play. I spent hours and days and years playing around with that, developing routes on how to beat the game while getting all the instruments in reverse order and never getting the sword, Rock's Feather, and a lot of other items, all in like under an hour. That makes it the most replayable Zelda game to me. However, Link's Awakening absolutely holds up even without this glitch, and if we were talking about the DX version I would still put it here at number 7. This is the first game in the countdown that I can't think of a flaw in, it's just perfect. The Super Nintendo had a way of sort of re-envisioning NES games like Metroid, Castlevania, and Super Mario Bros. 3, and basically showing off like, yeah, those games were nice, but this is how those games were supposed to be, motherfucker! And just like Metroid, after the second game, which turns out to be the series' Black Sheep, the third game goes back to the style of the first game, but makes it bigger and better. In the case of both of these series, way bigger and way better, to the point where it becomes one of the greatest games ever made. Now I didn't get to play Super Metroid growing up, but The Legend of Zelda A Link to the Past defined my childhood. It kinda hurts and saddens me that this game doesn't make it in my top 5. This game was everything to me. It wasn't just the first Zelda game I ever played, it was the first video game I ever played. I grew up with this game, and it was with me through everything. Nowadays we sort of drifted apart, but I still go back occasionally for a 33rd playthrough or something, and it still warms my heart when I play this game. Nostalgia aside, objectively speaking I still can't really come up with a flaw in A Link to the Past. But that said, there is just one thing that irks me about this game, but even this is tiny. On Death Mountain, you're given like a little preview of the Dark World for 10 seconds. Now luckily for me, my first time I didn't open up the map and see the entire Dark World. So while fighting Aghanim for my first time, I thought he was the final boss. It had taken me months, years to make it that far, and I had gotten the ultimate sword and climbed Hyrule Castle to face him. Keep in mind that this was my first video game, so I had no idea what to expect in terms of Link. It was a monumental achievement getting that far, and I was finally going to beat this game I'd spent so long playing. And after you beat Aghanim, holy fucking shit, I'm not even close to being done. I don't know, I just think that maybe by removing the little glimpse on Death Mountain, it would have been more of a surprise and more people would have had the same awesome experience I did. But I don't know. I wasn't exactly the rich kid on the block growing up, so one of my favorite childhood memories was when I was lucky enough to walk out of the store with 2 new Zelda games at once. These of course were The Legend of Zelda, Oracle of Ages, and Oracle of Seasons. Both games mean a lot to me, but of the two, Oracle of Seasons means more to me. That's because, after getting to the 3rd dungeon, I lost my copy of it. This was a traumatizing event for 9-year-old me, so I had to settle for playing Oracle of Ages over and over. And finally, after like 2 excruciating years, I looked between my mattresses, and there it was. Words cannot describe the feeling of finding something that you spent the last 2 years lamenting and building up in your mind and just wishing you could be playing right now. So after years of nothing but Oracle of Ages, I finally got to play my long-lost love, and it was everything I could have ever hoped for. Most people's complaint with this game is that over half the bosses are reused from the original Legend of Zelda. I never minded though. I mean, yeah, perhaps it was overdoing it with so many of them, but all of them were different enough, some to the point where they didn't even remotely resemble the original like Manhandla, and it was sort of a nice homage to the classic Zelda. Besides that, the story was kind of weak and Onyx was not a great villain. But the dungeons were fantastic, Subrosia was badass, and changing the seasons was really neat. But the items steal the show. Seriously, the magic boomerang that you can control its path, the rocks cape that lets you jump far and basically fly when you're using Pegasus seeds, and the hyper slingshot that lets you shoot 3 seeds at once. But the scene stealer is the magnetic gloves. These were freaking amazing and are in desperate need of a comeback, better than the one they got in 4 Swords. After Ocarina of Time, I feel like Nintendo knew they weren't going to be able to top that anytime soon, so they wisely chose to not even try, and instead went in a different direction and created a game that is completely insane. The result is one of the best games I've ever played. I consider The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask to be just as good a game as its predecessor, but in its own way. I just prefer Ocarina a little is all. But with that said, Majora's Mask is yet another game that I can't think of a flaw in. It's just absolutely perfect. It's the most atmospheric and in-depth game in the series by far, and I don't even know if I should bother trying to explain. This game just needs to be experienced. There's this threat looming over you the entire game, and everyone is sad and everyone is dying. I can't get enough of this game, and I just cannot recommend it enough. If you haven't experienced this masterpiece yet, get your hands on it as soon as you can. It's on the Virtual Console for like $10, so you have no excuse. Some people complain about a few things still. They complain that there's only 4 dungeons, to which I say, I wouldn't have it any other way. The dungeons are all top-tier quality, and having more would have had Nintendo focusing effort into those extra dungeons instead of the extensive side quests and incredibly atmospheric world. They also complain about the 3-day timer, but to be brutally honest, this pisses me off like no other. Play the reverse Song of Time to slow the timer down is all you have to do. They say they don't like feeling rushed. Well, don't start a dungeon or side quest at 12 AM on the final day, you fucking idiot. Why do I even have to be explaining this? I think that the 2 Oracle games mean more to me than they do to most people. In addition to the fact that most people have never played them, a lot of people seem to be under the impression that they're basically the same game with only minor changes, a la Pokemon Red and Blue. That couldn't be more wrong, however. Both games have their own world, plot, dungeons, and items, with very little overlap. Both these games are criminally underrated, and I consider them to be the pinnacle of 2D Zelda. But of the two, despite my extreme nostalgia for Seasons and it meaning a lot more to me, I consider Oracle of Ages to be the better game by far. The pacing of this game is near perfection. For me, the part between the end of the 4th dungeon and the beginning of the 7th flows so well and is executed so flawlessly that if the whole game was to the level of perfection of this segment, then Oracle of Ages may very well put up some serious competition for the best Zelda game ever. The story is fantastic. Veron is a great villain and Ralph is a good supporting character. The music blows Seasons out of the water, and that's saying something. The items aren't as good, but the dungeon design is far superior. Just yet another game in the countdown with no flaws. The best 2D Zelda game and my third favorite overall. The game that almost caused a nuclear war against Nintendo when it was announced turned out to be one of the greatest video game experiences ever. In The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker, you're armed with only a boat and a magical conductor's baton to take on the biggest world in the series. Wind Waker is absolutely stellar. The art style is charming and hasn't aged a bit, the music is easily the best in the series, and it tells one of the greatest tales in the Zelda legacy. The dungeons are really great too, but I don't know why there's no water dungeon. The items are awesome, the grappling hook is just too fun, there's new interesting songs to play with the Wind Waker like the command melody, and the mirror shield puzzles are even better than Majora's Mask. The Deku Leaf is my favorite though, there's just so many things to do with it. Also, if you get the Tingle Tuner, the levitation is really fun to experiment with. But the Great Sea is what it's all about. Now I know a lot of people complaining about sailing because, the boat's too slow. But for me the sailing allowed for the most genuine and most overwhelming exploration in the series since the original Legend of Zelda. That's why I never had a problem with the notorious Triforce Hunt at the end of the game, because unlike the people that were just trying to finish the game as fast as they can, for whatever stupid reason, and sailing just to get from A to B, I was exploring around and had already picked up a great number of the Triforce Shards and the Triforce Shards. So by the time the so-called horrendous Triforce Hunt came around, I only had like 2 or 3 more to go. Now I may be a college sophomore that works at Taco Bell, and call me crazy, but I think you guys were playing the game wrong. However, with that said, there are flaws in Wind Waker. For one, it's too easy. It's not as easy as Twilight Princess or Phantom Hourglass, but it's still pretty bad. Also, there's a shortage of dungeons, to the point where the game feels incomplete. Like after going through dungeons for the first 2 pearls, the third one is just given to you. Why couldn't there be a dungeon? I heard that at least 2 dungeons were cut before release to make a deadline. Like, I understand producers rushing development along to make a deadline, but Nintendo should have never done this. The GameCube wasn't exactly struggling for software that bad if I remember, and I know myself and everyone else in the world would have happily played Metroid Prime and Melee and Super Mario Sunshine for another few months if it meant a more complete and far superior Zelda game. And one last complaint, just as in Minish Cap, the bosses kinda suck. Especially the first 3. But as a whole, Wind Waker is one of the most fun, satisfying, and epic games to play through ever, and it is responsible for several of the greatest moments in the series. It's not a perfect game like some of the last few entries, but what it does good, it just does so good that Wind Waker remains my second favorite Zelda game ever.
Great! I can't wait!
Maybe this is a cliche entry to have at number 1. No, not maybe. I know it's a cliche choice for number 1. But do you think I give a fuck? Nope! This game didn't define my childhood like A Link to the Past, I didn't spend countless hours and hours and hours perfecting it like I did A Link's Awakening, and I didn't build it up in my mind for 2 years like Oracle of Seasons, and yet Ocarina of Time remains my all-time favorite video game. And that's because everything it does right, just as in Wind Waker, it does so damn right, but unlike Wind Waker, there's no real flaws to bring it down, even a little bit. At least I can't think of any. Of all the flawless games in this countdown, Ocarina of Time is the most flawlessy. Any little annoyances I used to have with Ocarina, like the somewhat slow text speed and the switching the iron boots over and over in the Water Temple, were fixed in the 3DS version. I used to think there was just one flaw, very little and very insignificant, but a flaw nonetheless. After leaving the forest, you have like this big world to explore and this big epic adventure to undertake. But you can't go too far before having to go back to the forest to learn Saria's song. I had always thought it sort of breaks the pacing and the sense of epic adventure you're feeling at that point. But then, just recently, I discovered that if you're smart enough, which I wasn't for the past 14 years, you can take a shortcut straight from Death Mountain to the Lost Woods. So the one and only tiny little problem I had with this game has now been negated. Unbefucking-leavable. Anyways, there's not a whole lot I can say about Ocarina that hasn't already been said, or that Detroit DJ already hasn't said better than I ever could, so I'm just going to talk about my favorite thing about this game. And that is, it's the most well-done coming-of-age story, not just in the Zelda series, but in any game I've ever played. Granted, I haven't played a whole lot of JRPGs, but still. Basically, you get called over by the Great Deku to solve a trial, which happens to be the first dungeon, seamlessly disguising the tutorial. Afterward, you leave the safe haven that you grew up in and say bye to your friends, and then you have this whole big adventure to undertake. And Kaepora Gaebora is there to mediate it, that stupid, annoying asshole. But anyways, you meet Zelda and the two of you come up with a silly plot to fight Ganondorf. You have to go on a quest to find spiritual stones. This entire child section of the game feels like just a game two little kids are playing, and I completely believe this was intentional. But then something crazy happens. You actually do get the Master Sword, and Ganondorf actually does take over Hyrule. And then when you wake up as an adult, it's like, holy fuck, this isn't a game anymore, shit just got real. You go to Kakariko Village and find people that you knew as a kid are now dead. You go back to your safe haven where you grew up only to find it infested with monsters. And then you go to the Forest Temple and it's like, yeah, those kid dungeons were fun. Now welcome to the real dungeons, bitch. It has keys and boss keys and twisting hallways and falling ceilings and powerful skeleton monsters and hands that come down from the ceiling and take you to your doom. It makes the entire first third of the game seem like a joke. It's such an amazing experience, similar to entering the Dark World in A Link to the Past, but a lot better. However, the sheer developmental genius does not stop there. You get the bow in the Forest Temple, which I think is real important, because in the world that you feel small and powerless in, it's a significant step toward greatness. This continues throughout the rest of the game until you finally basically conquer the world. Link grows in power and you get to see the biggest visual change in Link in the whole series. Not just the obvious child to adult Link difference, but by the time you confront Ganondorf you've got the red tunic, the mirror shield, the Goron sword, the hover boots, the golden gauntlets, which are all clear changes in Link's appearance, and as you prepare to fight Ganondorf you are able to reflect on everything you've accomplished. Unlike in Twilight Princess where Link looks and feels the same fighting Ganondorf as he did when you first get the Master Sword. This display of absolute sheer Nintendo genius has not been replicated anywhere else in the series in my opinion. But even aside from that, Ocarina of Time just does absolutely everything masterfully. There's like nothing it does wrong. It has the perfect amount of items, both necessary and optional, and the optional items are fun and even useful like Farore's Wind. The side quests are perfect, like the masks, the Goron sword, the Gerudo training ground, etc. The dungeon design is flawless, the music is wonderful, the aesthetics are always incredible and atmospheric, bosses are epic, the pacing is the best of any game I've ever played. I could go on like this, but you get the idea. The point is, Ocarina of Time is the greatest game I've ever played. That doesn't mean it can never be surpassed, and some games have come pretty close in my opinion, like the Metroid Prime games or Portal 2. But I think in this day and age of crappy brown generic shooters, we would just as soon hear a song titled Stupid Ho by Taylor Swift. But until that day comes, I have Ocarina of Time, and that is good enough for me.